Of course, we are live on X Spaces, on YouTube, on Facebook, and of course on myjoyonline.com. You're welcome. This is the post. Now let's start from the stables of the Defense Minister, Dr. Edward Omanebwan, because it revealed that nearly half of Army trainees may be withdrawn after audit found 46% of 452 recruits failed to meet enlistment requirements. Speaking at the Govt Accountability Series today, he also disclosed that thousands of rounds of military ammunition remain unaccounted for following an irregular 2024 transfer from the Ghana Armed Forces to the National Security. The Armed Forces, he said, have formally requested an investigation by the National Security Secretariat. Dr. Buama assured that such lapses in logistics and accountability would not occur under a John Mahama-led administration.
Security. It is with confidence and pride that I state that to a very large extent, Ghana is safe, stable, peaceful, and ready to experience a golden age under the reset agenda of His Excellency John Dramani Mahama. We have kept our nation safe and stable, notwithstanding the irregular transfer of thousands of rounds of military ammunition in 2024 from the Ghana Armed Forces to the National Security Outfit. Ammunitions which have since not been accounted for. Let me touch on missing ammunitions. I must say that, yes, it is not every detail that I can provide at this stage. But the fact that it's taking this long to capture it in this minute detail should tell you there must be a reason. If you go back to the President's State of the Nation address, 2025, he hinted at it. This is the next phase. But the reality is that to date, those ammunitions have not been accounted for. How the Ghana Armed Forces could transfer ammunitions to national security that doesn't have a fighting force in 2024 is a question that will definitely have to be answered. The Ghana Armed Forces has passed it on to the National Security Secretariat for the National Security Secretariat to investigate it, since they were the recipients of the ammunitions. But what we are doing is, under our watchful eyes, any such incidents will not be dealt with like the way it was handled in the past. So whilst we have encircled this and handed it over to National Security for National Security to handle, whatever will fall within our domain from January onwards, trust that we will deal with it the way the military knows best.
And of course, we'll stay a little longer on this matter relating to the Defense Ministry, because on recruitment, Dr. Boama reviewed that the last recruitment into the Ghana Armed Forces was conducted in 2021. However, an internal audit has uncovered that 2,872 Army potential recruits who successfully completed the entire selection process were never taken through training under the previous administration. He says a new recruitment process will be done and encourage all qualified candidates affected by the previous administrative delay to reapply.
This we are confronting. Let me first acknowledge with candor the Ministry of Defense, like all critical institutions of state, inherited substantial constraints in January 2025, some of which continue to test our resolve daily. We inherited a staggering institutional debt burden of over 3.7 billion Ghana cedis. Debt that was recently uncovered by the current military high command of over $32 million owed by the Ghana Armed Forces. These legacy debts continue to constrain our ability to invest adequately in critical defense priorities and warfare infrastructure. Alongside this, we are contending with a 17,000 unit accommodation deficit for our brave men and women in uniform. These are not just figures. They are realities that affect operational readiness, troop morale, and the dignity of service. Let me assure you, these are not lamentations. They reaffirm our determination to resolve these problems, first by acknowledging that they exist and deciding that never again should the government mismanage the nation's economy to this depressing level. We are fixing the challenges. Our well-designed programs are working. It is important to report at this stage that the last recruitment exercise for soldiers, non-officers, so the soldiers go to the Army recruit training schools and the various training schools, the officers will go to the Ghana Military Academy. So I'm done with the officer career. I'm now moving to the soldiers. It is important to report, let me repeat, at this stage, that the last recruitment exercise for soldiers, non-officers, was conducted in October 2021. However, the audit has revealed that 2,872 Army potential recruits who successfully completed all required processes, including documentation, medical examinations, and vetting, are yet to undergo training. Meanwhile, my visit to the Army Recruits Training School just last week disclosed the fact that the Army Recruit Training School has not been training recruits over the past 17 months. With the potential capacity for the Army Recruits Training School to train between 900 and 1,500 recruits every 6 months, a maximum of 3,000 every year, we wonder why the past administration allowed the situation of the 2,872 Army potential recruits to crystallize. Knowing that even healthy people die during military training, how can we rely on laboratory tests conducted years ago or over 6 months ago to recruit? How can we rely on body selection and fitness tests conducted years ago to inform recruitment decision now? Additionally, with the passage of time, many have exceeded the age limit. Considering all these significant factors, it has been decided that a new recruitment process will be conducted. I wish to emphasize that there were over 2,000 potential recruits who could not undergo training under the previous administration, even though vacancies existed at the Army Recruit Training School, are strongly encouraged to reapply, provided they still meet all the established criteria.
Well, the minister also added that the investigative report into the killing of 7 persons who allegedly attempted to breach the Anglo-Govt Ashanti security fence is ready, but is unable to disclose its content now. He says that John Mahama administration will not shield personnel found culpable in military brutalities.
Take it from me and take it from the Mahama administration. We will always treat crime as crime. We will not shield anyone. There is a report that has come out of the investigation that took place there. The outcome of the investigation is clear. Do I want to speak to it at this stage? No. However, subsequent actions will let everyone know what the implications of that particular investigation is.
Well, another matter of concern to a lot of Ghanaians is the Boko matter. Now, Dr. Boama admits the security situation in Boko and Alavanyo remains volatile. Now, Joy News Research Review, the defense budget has surged over 60%. Lead data and research analyst here at Joy News, Isaac Kofi Ajay, joins me in the studio as we go through the issue of the budget. We'll also be looking into the issue of recruitment and the unaccounted for ammunition when our guests join me in the studio to discuss the implications of this, especially those who've had some military training but will not be able to be enlisted into the Ghana Armed Force. What will come of them? Will they be added on to the already, serious situation of having people with military training but jobless, and then they are conveyanced into undertaking unlawful activities? We'll explore that and more. But first, let's talk about the defense budget. And Kofi is right here in the studio with me. So, Kofi, what do we have?
Well, Elton, usually they say that a well-functioning defense system is directly proportional to the expenditure.
Right.
The perfect example is the US and other countries like Russia and China, who spend significant components of their budgets on their military. When you come to Ghana,
the US, we're looking around 645 billion United States dollars.
That is a huge amount.
But that is the biggest. If you put Russia, China, and UK together, they still don't come anywhere near the US military spending.
So it means that they treat their defense with that sort of importance. And in Ghana, if you actually sample or look at the top 5 ministries or areas that we spend the most, definitely education health,
always number 1.
But defense will never leave when you're looking at the top 5. And in fact, in 2025, this year, the amount government wants to spend on defense is about 6.4 billion, Ghana cedis. And if you take it to dollar terms, you're talking about, let's say, roughly $640 million. Compare that to how much US is spending on military. It means that there is more room for improvement, but definitely because of our population and other areas that we focus on. But the reason why we decided to look at this expenditure is because of what is happening in the northern part of the country. And the president's assurance that definitely there will be some 12,000 recruits this year. They are just waiting for the assurance and clearance from the finance ministry to go ahead with that. Now, we didn't just look at this figure in isolation. In terms of capital expenditure, if you listen to the defense minister, what you see is that the defense system of the country really lacks capital.
Right.
Especially, he spoke about accommodation and what have you. And usually they depend on donor support to actually build some of these facilities and all of that. And if you look at this big figure, you may think that, well, 6.4 billion is huge. But about 89% of that goes into wages and salaries. So it means you have just about
11%.
Yeah, 11%
to take care of
CAPEX, administrative cost, and all of that. That is woefully inadequate. So let's try and understand this more. The reason why this is important is that 64% increment we are seeing in the defense budget is relative to this 3.9 billion allocation we saw in 2024.
So there's been almost 100% increment.
Absolutely. And we have been doing the math, and what you see is that the average has been around, let's say, some 38% increments almost every year. But this time around, we are doing 64% increment in the defense budget. And that is definitely an outlier. We did same in 2023, it was around 68%. But this is how the country's defense budgeting has been like since 2016. And definitely you see this 2025 figure being unprecedented. 6.4 billion is what you see there. Now, in terms of the northern part of the country, the reason why that is important is that there is that northern security. I'm talking about the border security that the government allocates a certain amount of money to every year. Last year was around 200 million Ghana cedis. But this year, we understand that although defense budget will be around 6.4 billion Ghana cedis, just about 100 million Ghana cedis will go to the northern border security as a budgetary allocation. That is 100% slash from what we saw in 2024. But the most important thing is that significantly, 84 or 89% of the 6.4 billion defense budget this
go into the payment of salaries.
Go into the payments of salaries and wages.
So how do they take care of equipment, infrastructure development, and the other things that come to make our defense quite tight?
Now you're talking about CAPEX, right? And definitely, if you look at this data, it simply tells you that CAPEX allocation is very, very small. So usually, governments would depend on donor supports, right? and programs from other multilateral and bilateral arrangements to actually close some of these gaps. So in years that we are not able to attract some of these monies or funding, our defense system, it becomes a bit, exposed in terms of capex, not in terms of its, strength or what have you. But in terms of the budgetary allocation, when it comes to capex and other accoutrement, usually it is from donor support and some bilateral and multilateral arrangements. And definitely, we are hoping that this year we could get more. But the bad news is that we all know what is happening in the U.S., where budgetary allocation to African countries have been reduced.
Right.
Even the UN, for instance, is battling with a slash in terms of its budget because of the decision that the US has taken. And so it will be interesting to see how we are going to fare this year. But the most important thing is that we possibly need to close that gap when it comes to CAPEX expenditure, because this data tells you that about 89%, let's say 90%
going into
our budgetary
payment of salary. But I'm curious to know, we've got the mid-year review coming up. Do you have the sense that perhaps government may be asking for more money to spend? Because in fact, I've been speaking to some state institutions, the heads of state institutions. For example, the scholarship secretariat, for example. And the information I get is that they will only spend after the presentation of the mid-year budget. Does it indicate that perhaps government will be asking for more money to spend? That's the reason why some state institutions have been asked to put all programs on hold until after the presentation of the mid-year review.
The reason why we are seeing it in this form is that government really wanted to use the first 6 months of the year to test how the economy will go.
Right.
Now, we understand that the city, is stable. We've seen fuel prices coming down. Inflation is now around 13% and all of that. This is a good assurance for government to go into the mid-year budget and possibly start spending. Because we understand the reason why BOG held that emergency monetary policy meeting was to consolidate and then also look at the broader data and give it to government to inform the decision that the finance ministry was going to look.
Right.
So the projection is that starting from we're already in the second half of the year, but after the mid-year budget, the projection is that expenses will start coming in, government will start expending. Already the president says that they have the assurance and clearance on the Ministry of Finance to start employing more people, not just in the defense side, but in other areas. And so government will go ahead to do more expenditure, possibly in the second half of the year, especially after they have seen how the data has fared in terms of government expenditure and all of that. And many have said that the reason why you have inflation coming down and the city performing well is that government has been very, very tight and fiscally disciplined in terms of what they want to spend. It's also important to note that in terms of even arrears, you have about 62 billion sitting on the books of government as arrears clearance that they need to pay. We understand that most of this amount of money has not been paid. It's just the road sector that enjoys some 4 billion in allocation. The analogy or the projection is that after the mid-year budget, government will go ahead to spend, and we'll see how the economy will respond.
Thank you very much for coming through. But, me and you have been looking at the Auditor General's report for 2024 that was just released, and already the figures we are seeing doesn't call for comfort.
In fact, we are talking about 18.4 billion Ghana cedis. That's about $1.8 billion US in financial irregularities. And significant component of that came from the energy sector. And again, ECG was in the mix. It will be interesting to see how that will also go. But we'll bring you all the updates and every data that's actually in the latest Auditor General's report.
Thank you very much, Kofi, for coming through. And of course, that is something that we are also looking through. So in the days to follow, we'll have more time to digest the Auditor General's report into state-owned enterprises, into corporations, boards, into secondary, tertiary institutions. Every sector of the economy will deal with that matter. Well, it's good time to bring in security experts. Joining me via Zoom, and of course, as always, privileged to have you, Professor Kwesi Enin, who is joining us. We'll also be speaking to a former Deputy Defense Minister, Mr. Kofi Amankwa Menu. Mr. Menu, if you can hear me, good afternoon and welcome to the pulse. Mr. Menu, if you can hear me, if you can unmute for me so we can hear you, good afternoon, welcome to the program.
Good afternoon, my brother. Good afternoon.
Great to have you here. So you heard the Defense Minister at today's Accountability Series, if you like, and he spent some time on the recruitment into the Ghana Armed Forces. And I'm curious to know why you will recruit people and will not give them training. They said about 2,000 people recruited, they've not been trained, and he doesn't even know what to do with them. What will be your reaction to the minister?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to your listeners. I think that, yes, before one starts training, there are certain procedures you have to go through. And when you go through all these procedures, you need commitment or commencement from the Ministry of Finance. So yes, the military prepared all these men waiting for commitment from the Ministry of Finance, commencement which we did not get. And so without a commencement, it becomes difficult to commit the soldiers to go into training when you don't have the budget to support them. So with the 2,872, this is my explanation. There is no way one will ask people to go through all the necessary processes for training only to leave them. No, nobody would do that. But after doing all that, you also need commencement from the Ministry of Finance, commencement which never came before we went in for the elections.
So because you didn't get a financial clearance, that's the reason why you couldn't move it to the next step?
Precisely the point. Precisely the point.
But isn't it necessary that you get that clearance before you even open the space for people to apply? Knowing very well that they will be taking through all the steps for
so
the
we
final
had
recruitment.
We have all the promises. So we were advised to start with the processes. We had, the promises from the Ministry of Finance that yes, we could start with the processes, and then when they are done, definitely we're going to get the commencement. But when that process was done, the Ministry of Finance then came to say that it was a bit late, and then we were very close to elections and all that, so they couldn't give the commencement. At that point, there was nothing one could do.
The minister's, solution to deal with this matter is to get them to reapply. But he makes the point that some of them have already exceeded the accepted age, meaning that in terms of the provisions under which one can be enlisted into the Ghana Armed Forces, age-wise, they are not ineligible. Now, these are individuals who've gone through some level of the steps to get into the Ghana Armed Forces. It is possible that when they reapply and they don't meet the age criteria, they will not be taken.
We have steps one will have to go through to start training. If you do not meet the criteria, obviously you cannot go for training. So if time has elapsed and these people who were supposed to have started training do not now, if we're going to have a new process done and they do not meet the criteria, they do not meet the criteria. This criteria is set by the Ghana Armed Forces. And so if one does not meet the criteria, one does not meet the criteria. It's simple. It's very simple.
And the difficulty I have here is that this will not be the doing of the applicants. The doing can be traced to the fact that you didn't get a clearance to go. So they are being punished for, something that they did not do.
My brother, let me say this, and let me be very emphatic, that I have always, as much as possible, stay away from politicizing security in this nation.
Right.
That when the very moment you begin to go that route, you get it all wrong. Let us do the right thing for the people of this country and for the Ghana Armed Forces. Let us not begin to apportion blame. Yes, we did not do it. Yes, we did. If you did not do it, and then those who now qualify within the criteria set up by the Ghana Armed Forces, then if they qualify, let them go through it. Let them go through it. If people do not qualify, they do not qualify, please. It is sad when, people want to politicize security. I really have a difficulty in doing that. Most of the time I refrain from going that route. But trust me, if I sit at where the minister sits today, I will do that which is right for the Ghanaian people and for the Ghana Armed Forces, and will never politicize issue. My brother, let me tell you something. We've had ministers in the past. All the ministers came to meet problems in the ministry. But because of the sensitive nature of the ministry, you have to have a very nice way of dealing with the problems and not run to the public domain for solution.
Right.
When you do that, you get it wrong.
And
Dr. Adokufo took over from the NDC. We never heard anything of this nature, but Adokufo came to meet problems.
right.
General Smith took over from the NPP. We never heard things like this. But General Smith obviously met problems.
Right.
The Honorable Nitiwu took over from the NDC. He came to meet a lot of problems, many. But there was not once that he went into the public domain with the problems of the Ghana Armed Forces. My brother, the Ghana Armed Forces is an institution that we all have to fight to ensure that its sanctity remains intact. The very moment we begin to go to the public domain with the problems, of course, there are certain problems the public will want to know and the public will need to know. So yes, that we can. But when we begin to politicize the issues of the Ghana Armed Forces, we may get it wrong. We may get it wrong.
The minister says he's being transparent and accountable to the people. How does it amount to politicization?
All the ministers that I have mentioned were very transparent. They were very transparent. If the minister today is seeking to be transparent, then he should not pick and choose. Because when it gets to where everything will have to come to the fore, nobody should be blamed for politicizing the security of this nature, because everybody has a name to protect and everybody will want to be transparent as much as possible. Everybody will want to do that. I sat there as a deputy defense minister. Trust me, my foremost duty was to make sure that the sanctity of the Ghana Armed Forces remain intact.
Okay.
And so I wasn't going to run to the public domain with any problem that came my way. No, I wasn't going to do that. But yes, I also had to be transparent. I have always believed that as a minister for defense, your work will show in how you conduct yourself and how you run the ministry, because we are talking of the security of our nation. I am not saying that there are no problems. I have listened. In fact, when you were playing, I was listening with accommodation and all that.
But we'll come to that, because I know that under the Akufo-Addo administration, the modernization of the barracks was key on the agenda. And I remember, as a former presidential correspondent, we went to the president to inaugurate some of these housing facilities for the military. But the minister says that housing is still a huge challenge facing the Ghana Armed Forces. So, it begs the question, so what exactly did we do in the last 8 years to now have to face the same challenge of providing accommodation for the military personnel?
So my brother, if you look at the history of the Ghana Armed Forces, I was having a conversation with a friend one time, and I said that if you ask me, the challenges of the Ghana Armed Forces were not actually looked at. And so they were left, their challenges were not met. And so they were left to be on their own for a very long time. And so any government that comes in wanting to deal with the issues of the Ghana Armed Forces, no matter what you do, will be a drop in the ocean, because this is an institution that has many problems which have not been attended to in the past. And I am glad you are mentioning the kind of infrastructure the Akufo-Addo-led government undertook for the Ghana Armed Forces. That, trust me, was unprecedented. But again, anyone will say it as being a drop in the ocean, because the accommodation gap was so huge. So yes, that I admit, that is a problem that as a nation, we all have to fight to make sure that the soldiers, men and women in uniform, get, a decent accommodation. I expect the minister, yes, that is a problem. He has to continue. In fact, just before we left office, we signed an MOU for the construction of a 2,000 unit for the Ghana Navy. I expect the minister to go ahead to ensure that we are able to do some of these things for our men and women in uniform. When we are able to do this, then we will be dealing with the issues and not to run into the public domain, anytime you encounter a problem under the thinking that you are being transparent. No minister has been under that in that ministry and not be transparent. No minister, because if you know the architecture of the Ghana Armed Forces and how the Ministry of Defense is run, you will appreciate the fact that you cannot be there and not be transparent. You simply cannot be.
There are a few issues I would like to pick your brains on. First, the minister makes the point that during your watch, under your watch, I'm under you because you were the deputy minister, together with Dominic Nitiwo, they had this issue of, let me quote, irregular transfer of ammunition to national security yet to be accounted for. Perhaps you can bring some clarity to this matter for us, because this is quite sensitive.
My brother, there again, it is very difficult for anybody to sit and say we cannot account for some ammunitions or anything of that sort. Because whenever delivery, as the military takes delivery of ammunition, they have a meticulous way of taking records, keeping records, and all that. And so anything and everything that moves from every stage, there should be some accountability, or there should be proper records of all that.
In this case, the minister says thousands of them cannot be accounted for.
That I will beg to differ. If thousands of that cannot be accounted for, that did not get to the Ministry of Defense. And you and I know that these things are managed by the Ghana Armed Forces. And these things are managed by people who have the expertise to manage them. And for me, accounting for these things will not be so difficult at all. My brother, anytime national security needed any help, they fell sometimes on the Ghana Armed Forces.
Right.
And even the Ghana Police. And so tracing all these things wouldn't be a difficult situation at all. It would not be difficult at all.
Yet 6 months into the administration, they've not been able to trace the ammunition and what it was used for. 6 months. And this is coming from the sector minister.
This should be the work of the minister to find out that, okay, so where did this go? And once they have records, this will not be a difficult thing to really do. It will not be too difficult at all. Knowing where, a gun or an ammunition went, who took what did it use for me, this wouldn't be too difficult a thing to do. And so I find it a bit absurd that the minister will run to the public domain with some of these issues. Because this, for me, if you ask me, this really is just the ABC of managing the ministry.
Because
it's just the ABC.
Because probably he's not getting the answers that he needs. That's the reason why he's taking it to the public domain.
I will find it difficult if the minister will not get the answers he needs, because he is the minister and he should get the answers. When the records are there, who is going to tamper with the records?
All right.
Once the records are there, as the minister, you have every right to call for those records. And so I will find it a bit laughable that the minister cannot have access to those records. Then there is something really wrong somewhere.
Mr. Man, kindly hold it from. Let me bring in, of course, as always, a privilege to have you, Professor Kwesi. Prof, good afternoon. Welcome to the program.
Good afternoon.
So you've been following the conversation. I mean, before I brought you in, we're talking about the minister makes the point, and I want to quote him directly. He says, there's been irregular transfer of ammunition to national security from the Ghana Armed Forces. 6 months into the administration of the Mahama government, thousands of them yet to be accounted for. Does it sound bizarre for you, Prof?
No, far from it. Unaccounted ammo and weaponry It's a problem that all armed forces face. And I think at the Kofi Annan Center about 3 or 4 years ago, we held a meeting with retired senior officers and our colleagues from Small Arms Survey of Geneva, looking not only from Ghana, but from Africa as a whole, levels of leakages, both from legitimate stockpiles and alternative stockpiles. So unaccounted for ammo and weaponry. I mean, it's not something new to armed forces at all.
And the former deputy minister says that the minister should be able to get all the answers again. He doesn't even think that he should take this to the public domain because all the records are there. And yet, that, like
I beg to differ. You know, similar to going, recruiting people, training them, and saying that the Ministry of Finance didn't release the funds. The procedure of budgeting for the military is that it takes place during the Ministry of Defense presentation of its military expenditure estimates to Parliament, which starts with a formal request by the Defense Financial Controller, okay, to the service heads and to the Ministry of Defense. That is then submitted to the Ghana Armed Forces headquarters and subsequently to the Ministry of Finance. You know, so it's almost impossible for the recruitment to be done and then for Ministry of Finance to say, we don't have the money. Because it is a close partnership in determining what will come to the military, you know, before these figures are made known. So something might have gone wrong. But otherwise, you know, it's a fairly routine process. The military will say, we want X amount of money. The Ministry of Finance will say, no, we can provide 2 minus half or 0.5. You know, so there is always a clarity around this. But I think the former minister sits on the Committee on Defense and Interior and possibly on Security and Intelligence. And I think this is a conversation that they can have, both in terms of the men who have been trained and the ammunition that cannot be traced. We will be taking the Small Arms Baseline Survey that seeks to understand levels of leakages and the competence of stockpile management in this country very soon.
Prof, let me read these codes. Perhaps you can help us reconcile. So, in February 2025, during the presentation of the State of the Nation, the President Mahama says, and I quote, "As Commander-in-Chief of the Ghana Armed Forces, I want to emphasize our determination to strengthen democracy. This is particularly true given the troubling proliferation of military-grade weapons that fell into unauthorized hands under the previous administration. These weapons pose a significant threat to our national security and constitutional democracy, endangering the safety of all Ghanaians and potentially exacerbating existing conflicts such as chieftaincy disputes and armed robbery." This was in February 2025. Now today, the Minister for Defense says we have kept our nation safe and stable, notwithstanding the irregular transfer of thousands of rounds of military ammunition in 2024 from the Ghana Armed Forces to the National Security Outfits. Ammunition which have since been unaccounted for. These two statements, I mean, I don't know whether it leave you in a state of confusion, or they are all speaking the same language.
They are all speaking the same language, and it's part of a trend that we see in this country. Let me go back to the Ayawaso West War on violence. During the Emil Short Commission of Inquiry as to who these balaclava-clad individuals were, it was obvious they were using equipment, both vehicles, clothing, weaponry, ammunition, paid for by the Republic of Ghana. But all the security ministers who appeared before the Emil Short Commission basically told the commission that they didn't know where these guys came from. Okay? So it raises fundamental questions about the establishment of alternative armed groups in this country
right.
by incumbent governments that, even Parliament does not know about as the oversight institution. So the presence of military-grade weaponry in civilian hands is mostly found in 2 or 3 places: at Accra Dollar Power, and certainly when the Boko crisis always explodes. We know that they are using military-grade weapons. But more disturbing is the fact that the 6.4 billion that we are happy about is also a drop in the ocean as compared to.
In fact, over 80% is going to the payment of salary.
Yes. So if you look at what is being used to equip and train and retool, it is a fraction of what Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are using for their armed forces. So Ghana is way off the mark. But I'm hoping that we can have another occasion where I will actually break down the historical figures of our military expenditure. Until recently, probably 15, 20 years ago, we were putting in less than 1% of our GDP into our military expenditure.
Right.
If you take out housing, electricity, water, and the basics, almost nothing is left to defend this country. So the 2 statements from February and July tie in quite well. And I know that when Mr. Menu was deputy minister, they had attempted to build these 9 or so forward operating bases as a response to the assessed external threats to this country. So I think he himself recognizes that we cannot have a military that is underfunded, under-equipped, under-trained, that also has international demands on its time in terms of peacekeeping. But whatever the minister has raised today, I think are issues relating to the transparency.
Right.
We can all talk a lot about helicopter acquisitions, tank acquisitions, the quality of those tanks, the quality of the equipment that were brought. But this is not a debate for the larger public.
Right.
Okay, because one doesn't want to sow fear. But there are serious issues that we need to discuss openly with our military, learn from the lessons of the previous past leadership, and then to prepare ourselves to face any unexpected challenges.
Let me pick your few minutes on this matter of the recruitment. Now, we have over 2,000 individuals. Most likely, they may not get a chance to serve in the Ghana Armed Forces because, one, they've exceeded the age limits. And the reason cannot be the fact that when they applied, they were above that age limit. The reason being that government could not get the finance ministry the clearance that was necessary to get them to go through their training and be enlisted. That the minister said they will have to reapply, and already the condition of age already disqualifies them. And here we are. How do we move forward in dealing with this thorny issue of recruitment into the security agencies?
Yeah, so here I want to go back to what Mr. Menu said with respect to Dr. Kwame Adukufo. When Dr. Kwame Adukufo became the Minister for Defense, we had all kinds of irregular people who had been infiltrated into the Ghana Armed Forces from the revolutionary days. The NPP regime then managed to demobilize and reintegrate them into society very quietly, pay them whatever they were supposed to be paid. Now, these people have not been formally, recruited into the Ghana Armed Forces, given all the training that is necessary. But they can be demobilized, told that, look, it is not possible for being made to wait. This is the X percentage of whatever you would have gained for 3 years of service. Thank you very much for willing to put your lives on the line for the Republic of Ghana. This is a technocratic problem, and it must be solved technocratically within the Ministry of Defense. This shouldn't be any difficulty at all. But be that as it may, it should never be possible that we go through the process of budgeting for X number of individuals who need to be recruited, only for the state to turn around and to say the Minister of Finance has refused. That is bad budgeting, and that is bad leadership, and it demoralizes the troops. Finally, we also do know that retention is becoming a problem. Because although being recruited into the armed forces is fascinating, that levels of attrition in the last 10 years is between 5 to 10% sometimes. And that is quite a high figure of people who have been trained who suddenly find out that they don't want to be in the service. So the minister's concerns, I will argue, are apt. We are talking about transparency. This is an oral process which every institution must insist on, and then we can have a conversation around the issue that the minister has raised. But these are weighty issues that we shouldn't brush under the carpet. So kudos to the minister.
And are we ever going to have a merit-based recruitment?
I think we are heading there from what the president said, decentralizing. The military has its, format for recruitment, what qualifications you must have. And I think if we take out this canker of, the protocol enlistment,
right?
Because we know people who have been protocol enlisted, who were not healthy enough, who were not fit, only to go for the training and then lose their lives tragically. So let's do the right thing. Let's decentralize. Let's allow the armed forces to have that diversified structure and composition that is reflective of the Republic of Ghana and build the loyalty that we are looking for so they can serve this country.
Well, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. I appreciate it as always. Let me bring in Mr. Kofi Manu, former Deputy Defense Minister. Mr. Manu, do you have any reaction before I pick your brains on the budgetary allocation to the Defense Ministry?
In fact, I was going to address that. So yes, it is true. I agree with Prof. So beginning of...
if you can kindly unmute for me, Mr. Manu.
I have done that.
Great, please go on.
So before the beginning of every budget year, you present your needs and all that to the Ministry of Finance. But there is something that we must all avert our minds to. You are able to do all that you want to do if, when you present your budget, the monies are released to you timely. But in our case, it is not so. And so, yes, you present the budget and all that. In most instances, even when you present a certain budget to the ministry, you'll be lucky even to have half or more than half of the budget. And so you always have to, have the balancing act of doing things to make sure that you also keep body and soul of the Ghana Armed Forces moving.
Right.
And so every now and then you have some of these things happening. But for me, I agree with Professor Enin. When we have issues, it is not every issue of the Ghana Armed Forces that we have to run into the public domain with. Because, trust me, if we are not able to keep the sanctity of the Ghana Armed Forces intact, we will have problems in this country. We will have problems. If there are problems, yes, we have to deal with it. Professor Enin mentioned what Dr. Adokufo did. I don't think this was, a rush into the public domain with all these things. Some of the things, you do them quietly, because when it gets into the public domain, another dimension will be added to it, a dimension which will not inure to the benefit of our country in terms of security. That is why I say that in dealing with security, it is less talk, more work.
All right, let's leave it here for now. Mr. Kofi Amankwa-Manu is a former Deputy Defense Minister during the administration of Nana Akufo-Addo. And we'll be dealing with the matter of the Defense Ministry based on the news conference that the minister had this morning at the President's Day Jubilee House. Let's take a short break and return with more here on The Pulse.